Oh, is anybody online with me now? I'm just teching it a little early. It's the first time I've done this, so I kind of want to make sure I'm doing it right. How am I showing up to people? If somebody could just send me a message in the chat and let me know. Okay, am I live? Okay, thanks. That's appreciated. As I say, I'm new to this. My name is Bob Koenn. Ed contacted me about a month ago, and because I've done lots and lots of building, he asked me to do this craftsmanship event. And hey, Mark. Anyway, so I decided maybe to do the Antar, which I had bought but hadn't opened yet. And because it's kind of a classic Estes build, you know, balsa and that, got a plastic nose cone, which when I started building around 1967, nothing came with plastic nose cones really. So I've had a lot of experience with balsa and finishing it and that. So anyway, I got some videos, and I have and just for the people who don't know, my background was I got an engineering degree from FTU, UCF in Orlando, and was a NASA co-op, and then I ultimately got a full-time NASA job, and I worked shuttle from the very beginning to the very end. And just to remember fondly, one of the things that this was on the final shuttle mission, and so that was our landing team. After that's the very last shuttle mission. And if you noticed over on the far right, that guy is Bruce Milnick, who actually flew 2 or 3 times and was retired and came down to he wanted to be there to hobnob with the crew, and he helped us out on our work after the landing. His son is the guy with the red hat on, so he had a kind of an in with us. But anyway, get rid of that. So let me try to pop up the beginning and see if I can get my and if it doesn't work, let me know. So this is model rocket craftsmanship, and as I say, I decided to build the Antar as part of it. And there's a picture of the what's in the box, and you got your body tube, your laser cut fins, which is nice because in the old days you had to use templates. Got your engine mount parts, and the Antar had some fancy ones you can see in the center, the ribs on the engine exit, nose cone, recovery system, decals, and instructions. And I didn't know it at the time, but when I was taking the pictures, I had put my camera into manual focus, so these were a little bit out of focus, but I just wanted to show the punched out fins. The Antar included a jig for the putting on the side wings. So you had built up this little jig. That was kind of nice. Now, as I say, it did use some older type construction, no plastic fins or anything. So one thing is what I've been doing lately to get rid of seams is I usually use Rust-Oleum primer and spray it on, and then sand it down and spray it on and sand it down until the spirals disappeared. And down in the bottom left is the starting to build up of the aft engine mount with the ribs, and there's the jig. And I used to use Pactra sanding sealer and balsa filler coat, and that stuff I guess has been discontinued probably for lack of a market. And so I just found this stuff, and it works pretty good. It's very similar to use, but it is acrylic, so there's no odor and there is no cleanup. Is just washing your brush out in water. None of the smelly Pactra stuff was really noxious. So this was after I was putting the I had finished the fins and had glued them on. So let me see if I can bring up one of the videos. Now I can show you. I'm going to narrate real time because the audio that I got on the videos was pretty bad. But anyway, just I'd emptied the box and going through the parts here and describing them as they come out of the box, and we'll pop forward. I had a lot of explanation about how, what I've basically said so far, but there's the Antar. And I guess Estes, I just saw last night with Bill Stein, Estes is coming out with this fancier packaging for some of their classic kits or higher end kits nowadays. And we got the body tube. In the background, you can see I've gotten into, I really always like scale models, but lately I kind of stopped building for a while, but then I saw that on Shapeways, they have these 3D parts available. There's a guy, Aerobotics, and Kevin Suspides, and he has a lot of, that's basically the classic Estes kit, which I built one of around 1979 or 70. And the whole nose cone is 3D printed that I pulled off, and the whole rear section from the black markings back is one 3D printed part. They're pretty amazing, and he's done quite a few of the Estes older kits, and you can buy the parts from him. Because they're 3D printed, they're a little bit costly, but it isn't too bad. You can see all the corrugations are there. The fins were printed right on, and there's even little bolt details. The aft end actually had printed in the nozzles and that of the solids that made up the real rocket. And I just built it I've flown it a couple of times so far. But even the way the actual construction was kind of a rough sheet metal construction. He printed that right in. Now that's the Estes Honest John kit, the small one, and the nose cone was from Estes, but I don't believe there were spin motors, so I bought 3D printed spin motors to put on it, and the whole entire aft section was one 3D print, which I replaced the kit with. The V2, they're sitting over behind me right now. It's the Estes. It's BT55 based, and the whole entire aft section and nose cone are 3D printed. And the Whack Corporal, I built one of those way back in the late 60s, and it's even got the real rocket had kind of a curvature on the back end, a boat tailish, and that was printed in. The nose cone was printed. And I'm still working on this Arcus, and now the nose cone on that one I got from E-Rockets, and it's a classic balsa Estes type nose cone. He didn't make a 3D printed nose cone for this one, but the entire fin unit on the back is 3D printed. You can see how he puts the detail in like the real sounding rocket. So that was pretty cool. The detail he puts into these designs. You could do it yourself if you wanted to, and you had a 3D printer, and I'm thinking of maybe getting into the 3D printing, but I haven't bit the bullet and bought one yet. So so I'm back on the Antar and just describing the parts. Cone, I scraped down with an X-Acto knife the edges from the mold, and more of I actually haven't put those in the kit yet, the recovery system, but got some nice decals with it, which makes it look good afterward. Anyway, so that does that one. James Duffy, Tamiya lacquers. I did use some Tamiya on some. I actually like Krylon, although their new formulations aren't quite as nice as the old formulations were. So, but I do use Tamiya on my plastic models when I build them quite frequently. And James, I don't know if you know it, but they just released their colors in jars of lacquer, quite a bit less expensive and straight into the airbrush. And actually for the Antar, I decanted from cans the green and the silver, and you put it in my airbrush just so I'd have more control. I didn't want to, cans, you got paint going all over the place, and you got to do a little better job of masking with them. So let me see. Let's go back to this. So that was at this point, I think I had finished all the treatment, the preparation of the balsa with the sealer coats and that. And I had epoxied. Now my method lately of attaching fins is to I put the lines on the body tube with the fin guide that came with the kit, and but I have I've been using CA. When I started, there wasn't any CA, and I was using old Elmer's, and you had to hold it in place. So with these wings, I put a line of CA down the edge and attached them to the side. Then I mix up 5-minute epoxy and I dribble it kind of into the joint. Take my finger and draw it down the joint and get a smooth finish. And you got to be a little careful because at the ends you might pull a couple of times, and even on the Antar I can see it where there was a little excess right near the ends of the fins, and it shows in the final finish, but it wasn't too bad. So I wasn't being real critical, not scale model type building on this one. It was more of a fun build since it's going to be just a sports flyer. I've got all 3 of the fins on there now. So you can see my select bunch of 3D printed, mainly rockets in the background. Let me see if I can pull up another video here. So I just when I did like balsa fins, I don't want to sand down the airfoil completely because that's a lot of work, even with rough sandpaper. But so I will typically take my X-Acto and I'll carve off the leading edge. And if I decide to airfoil it across the entire fin, I will do it the same thing to the trailing edges. It's pretty easy to do the leading edge because the line of the balsa grain is in line with it. The trailing edges are a little trickier, and you got to be a little more careful because you're cross cutting, and that doesn't always work so great. So I carved down the leading edge of the fins. I decided on the Antar to let the trailing edges stay flat, and just saves me a lot of sanding, which is the biggest reason I do it that way. And you can see the trailing edges and the outer trailing edge. I left those flat on this kit. I usually sand them, but I decided on the Antar I like the flat edge. And I'm getting something from the other side of my workshop. When I built this house, we moved from near the Space Center over to Tampa area, and me and my brother actually took half the garage and turned it into a workshop. So my wife wouldn't have to put up with me turning one of the bedrooms into a workshop, which wouldn't have made her very happy. So start with rough sandpaper and finish up and get a nice smooth airfoil leading edge on the balsa. I start with rough, and then when you get it pretty good with the rough, you can take a finer sandpaper and make it smoother before you start doing the finishing with the sanding sealer. That sanding sealer that I was talking about, I get a lot of hobby supplies. I do a lot of plastic modeling these days, and there's a place in Georgia called Hobby Link, and they have it for like $8 or something. It was the cheapest. Amazon's like twice that much to buy the little jar of it. So yeah, let me see. I'm spending a lot of time on sanding, which is a little boring. So we'll move ahead. I've got a pretty good airfoil on it. I'll clean up the squared edges on the trailing wing parts. And it'll pretty much have one of the wings ready. Cleaning up my bench. Now, the Antar has these little wing stubs coming up on top of the wings, so that was a little bit, and there's one of those edges where you're cross-cutting the grain, so you have to be a little careful there. It's easy to gouge it out, and I just take off a minimal amount and then do the rest with sanding, which gives you more control than trying to cut cross grain. Cross grain cutting has always bugged me. And Estes did a nice clean job of laser cutting these fins. Now the aft end, we got the engine mount is just a standard engine mount with cardboard rings and laser cut again. But on the Antar, what they did do was they gussied it up. They made it look better, like a nuclear engine or something. So you punch out this one ring that has all these little cuts for the ribs. That the ribs are cardboard as well. So got to punch out all of those little cutouts, and then just going to try a test fit here before I start using the glue. And one of the ribs there, and they just kind of insert. It's not the greatest, but it works fine. I think when I did it, I would usually do cardboard to cardboard with wood glue, but because those are so fine and you get the run over with, I actually did these with thick CA. After I had them all in place, I used thick CA to hold them in place. And we'll put, of course, the standard engine mount kind of thing, put your engine hook in and clamp it with the little ring they give you. And got an engine block in the nose and standard engine mount construction. Okay, that does that one. Yeah, sanding, Robert. A lot of sanding on everything, even my plastic models. Let me go back and see where we are with the so those are pictures. I want just some, construction step pictures. And I had, by this time, I put on the 3 fins the same way. I put CA along the root edge, put it into place, sprayed it to cure it. I used slow curing thick CA. And then once I had it on, I mixed up 5-minute epoxy for, I can do about 2 or 3, maybe up to 4 with 5-minute epoxy fillets on those kind of fins. Then I don't try to go any further, because right at the tail end, as it starts to get thick, it'll stick to your finger and make a real mess. You want to get it smoothed out, and you run your finger back and forth as much as you think you need to get a nice smooth transitional joint. It's kind of eyeballing it. There it is. I think, yeah, at this point I've got the epoxy on all the joints, and even on the launch lugs you can see the epoxy showing around the edges. Oh, we're to that. So let me bounce back to see what video I've got next. I'll be back in a second with my number 3. Got to bop back and forth between my toolbar, and it disappears. And here we go. So that was there's a wing that I've got ready to put the sanding sealer on. I've put the also found out after I put on the root coat, of the primer, the primer paint on afterward. I hadn't quite filled that in, so I actually took some Tommy plastic putty and filled it in, and pretty well it hit that that opening where it goes down. But this is the now that's one of the tail fins, and it's all sanded airfoil. On that one I did do, I sanded all the edges to an airfoil, and here's that Deluxe Materials Sand and Seal. And as I say, I really like this stuff. It's acrylic, no odor, easy to clean up, and consistency is very similar to the old sanding sealer. It might not be quite as efficient as the old Pactor stuff, but overall it's pretty darn good. So it's easy to brush on. It goes on smooth. It's fairly thick. About the consistency of the old sanding sealer. So just brush it on. And I think you need, really, to do it right, you need about 3 coats, which was what I used to do with the sanding sealer most of the time. If I was doing basswood, which wasn't quite as porous, I might have gotten by with 2 coats of sanding sealer. And of course, sand in between coats to get to make it smooth between each of the coats. And always now typically find something to rest it against with the root edge until it dries. Put the root edge down and let it dry. And let me see what else is in this video. I had another fin, so got rid. Oh, I hadn't sanded. I think I only had 1 fin ready at this time. So now here was the joint for the dorsal fin, which had an extension on it. So I glued the extension on flat on the workbench. This is the body tube where I put on the primer and sanded it down. I like this Rust-Oleum primer. It dries, it doesn't run very much, it's easy to control, and then anyway, with a primer you can do whatever you want afterward. So just once you get it on, take your sandpaper and hide the spiral, get rid of the spiral. I've noticed on the tubes lately, the spirals actually seem to be less than they did in the past when I used to build. I remember doing a lot of spirals when I did the Apogee Saturn 1B on those 8 tubes. And I don't know about the latest Krylon, but I noticed back when I did my Apogee, I was using Krylon primer, and it seemed to gum the paper, plus it took longer to completely dry. That's the engine mount, pretty much completed. I always use wood glue on cardboard to paper to cardboard or whatever, and all the little ribs to make it look cool. And anyway, the Antar's kind of a cool kit. I like science fiction, and it's even got a scale-ish rocket. I use Titebond wood glue for my wood glue. There I am, off the camera. My first time making a video. Scrape off, and since I do a lot of plastic models, I'm constantly using the X-Acto that way. And once you scrape down the mold line, you take some sandpaper and attack it with your sandpaper. Of course, by being plastic, the prep for painting on a plastic nose cone obviously is pretty minimal. That's nice. I gotta agree that that's nice, but I guess I'm still a kind of an old rocketeer, and balsa, I still like balsa. So anyway, nose cone's basically ready to prime and paint when the time comes. And now to go back and look at the I lost my somehow I got behind on my There we go. I'm gonna have to catch. I think I closed it. So this was I actually did the primer with the gray Rust-Oleum, and at this point I think that I put on a I may have put on a Krylon white primer, but ultimately I did the white with a Krylon, and like Jim said, the Tamiya would be better. It's quite a bit more costly, and this wasn't like a scale model, so it's a sport flyer. And I found one formulation of Krylon lately that seems to work pretty good, as long as you don't overspray and get runs. And I managed to do a pretty good job on this one. So after I got the Krylon on and everything looked pretty good, I needed to paint the section silver. I've seen a couple other guys build this thing, and they do it in a different sequence. And but I figured I wanted to do the fillets and everything, so I did the entire rocket right, and then I started masking. And for the root edges, right where the masking is actually gonna meet with the white, I used Tamiya tape. That's great stuff. I can't recommend that tape enough. And then I would go out with the blue wall tape and that to and as I say, I decanted Tamiya chrome silver and poured it into my airbrush, and it gave me a little more control, so I didn't have to do quite as much masking as spraying it straight out of the can. And I didn't mask areas that were going to get the green color that goes in the paint scheme. Funny thing is I got an air booth in my shop, and even using the airbrush, after I had done this silver and I removed the tape, there was a mist, very faint mist of silver over the white, where I needed to actually cover everything, even with the airbrush in the air booth. I needed to cover everything. So, but anyway, it came out real nice, and the lines were nice and clean. And then the upper part where the silver goes down to the white wings I got a super clean line. And on the bottom, it doesn't matter because I'm going to end up painting the bottom of the wings green, so the overspray didn't matter. And this was getting ready to do the bottom of the wings, and I used Tamiya British Green, decanted it from the spray can. And in the future, now that Tamiya's got their lacquers out in little jars like their acrylic paints, if I do something like this, I'll buy the jar and use that instead. I don't really like decanting too much. But this time, remembering that I got a little bit of misting with the silver, I covered everything with just scrap paper, the instructions, whatever, and covered the areas so I wouldn't get green overspray misting. That's after the greens. I got the bottom of the wings are green and the dorsal fin is green, and the lines, once again using the Tamiya for the hard line, came out real nice. Let me go back and see where I am with videos. I'm looking at the chat, just I'm curious what people are saying. So let me go. Well, I need to bring up a video first, number 4. I will reverse a little bit. I should have brought this video up earlier, but this is how I put on a wing. The wings, just I'll do the fins the same way, but that was the template. I've got all the lines on the tube, and I've got I had the root coat or the base coat of the primer on. When I put on a line, I used that the template, but then I went down to Ace Hardware and bought one of these angles, and cut a piece off that's good, good size for building in the workshop, and use it to draw the lines. You can do it along the frame of your door, but that's a lot easier with just go down and grab it, buy one at Ace Hardware or somewhere. You get a nice straight line. That's the jig that they included with the kit, so you got the wings on perfectly perpendicular to the size of the tube. And just checking out the lines and I got to get them positioned obviously correctly on the jig to put the wing on. And they also had the 3 lines for the fins that will go on the aft end later. And then you just had to measure. They had the measurement up the side of the tube, how far up the wing goes. And so my both wings have been sanding, sealed, and primed, and they're ready to go. And as I say, I'm going to put the CA along the root edge, and I use thick, slow cure for something like this. For those of us really old rocketeers, we remember the days of CA came out in the 70s sometime, but before that, this was a Elmer's or wood glue kind of thing. But that jig really helped to get these side wings on and line it up to the correct marking on the side. And I'm checking, so I got it about equal on each side for the 2 wing lines, and put it into place. Now it won't harden because I say it's slow cure until I zap it, so it gives me time to correct any mistakes or get it lined up correctly to both sides. And I guess I'm happy. One thing about my shop is, since we built it in one of the half of the garage, it's a little narrow, and I got it full of all my hobby stuff. It's to the ceiling with kits and paints and tools, and you can see my airbrush booth back behind me, and I vented it out into the front of the garage. Put the other one fin on wing, and even though it had the lines, you had to make sure they were the same on each side, rotating it a little teeny. Didn't want it to be off at all, really, on this stuff. Now, time to spray. And it really didn't get stuck that much. But that was pretty easy. That jig helped a lot. Lining it by eye, and lining it with the jig rather than doing it by eye with those, which would be very easy to have missed. Now, this is my method of creating a fillet, and I do it on most of my rockets these days. All these 3D printed are coming with the fin units completely intact, and I mix up some 5-minute epoxy, and I've never really had a problem. I just squeeze out, an equal amount in a line on a piece of scrap and stir it up. And over the years, I've never really not gotten it at least close enough that I don't, equal halves, that I've never had it not cure or stay sticky or that on me. So I grab old envelopes from advertising out of the mail. It becomes my palette. And I dribble it in. Anybody who's built a rocket's probably used 5-minute or slower epoxy. If you want to do a bunch at the same time, you can always get 10-minute or whatever. And when I've used 10-minute and slower cures when I've had a lot of work to do, like when I built some high power rockets, I would get longer cure. And then I run my finger. I don't know how good I do this. Have some towels handy to wipe the excess epoxy off. Just run it down, draw it down the line. Gives a great brown fillet. You go back and clean up afterward because you might get a lot of excess out on the tube and further out on the wing. So I'll always go back and do some cleanups, wiping the excess off my finger. And then, as I say, one thing to look for is at the very ends where you lift your finger, make sure you've got any excess off the tube. I had a couple little teeny spots that aren't really too bad, but since this is a sport flyer, it's not that, doesn't matter that much. But if it was a scale model, I wouldn't have been happy with it. But I may not have used epoxy on a scale model anyway. And once it's cured, you know, you don't have any, the epoxy is going to be exactly where you squeegeed it into the joint. It's not like wood glue. It won't depress into openings. It won't shrink. It's going to be just like it is when you've done that. Yeah, David Koenn. I have a little squeeze bottle of not isopropyl, but I think wood, the kind I bought a can of wood alcohol, and I'll use that to clean up my fingers and everything later. The alcohol gets it off your fingers, and it always feels crappy on your fingers when you're doing that. Let me go back. I did the wrong thing. So I've really got the painting pretty much done. The only thing that was left was to paint the engine exhaust area with all those ribbed silver, which I ended up doing with my model acrylic silver paint and did it by hand. I wasn't going to try to mask off the rear end. Painting the aft end with acrylic by hand is easy. Now the Antar did have some other things. One was I had to do the top of the wing has that pattern. It has a narrow narrow green splice, and then actually out at the end it has an additional trim piece. So I masked it off with Tamiya. You can see the Tamiya, and then and I decanted the green Tamiya into the airbrush and sprayed it with the airbrush. You can see now the top of the wing. I also used Tamiya, and I went out and they didn't give you any templates or anything for that paint. You just go by the paint pattern in the instructions. So I had to mask those off, and that outer trapezoid pattern, and also the inner edges of those wedges on top of the fin was. And I did all that by masking it with Tamiya tape and airbrushing it with the British green Tamiya lacquer. I had one guy who, when I was building it, I was asking some questions, and one guy said he like made his own decals, and I've done it where you take a sheet of decal paper and you spray it with the color you want, and then you cut them out. But when I thought of doing that, but then I looked and I said, you know, the masking on this isn't that difficult, and making the decals would be, and then laying them down too on that size, and they get thicker when you paint onto them. So I ended up doing it all with masking, and I had some work, but I didn't have any real trouble. The final thing is they wanted you to put a very narrow silver leading edge on the top and bottom of the wing. So I returned to the masking again and the airbrush with the Tamiya silver lacquer. And this is the completed one. I was pretty happy once I got all the decals on and that. One nice thing about this kit was when I first looked at the paint pattern, I was looking at that nose and I'm going, how am I going to mask off a red stripe? Well, there was a decal. So I just rough masked the silver tip and then laid the decal down, which was trying to mask a stripe on a conical surface is always a pain. Anyway, I ended up being pretty happy when I was all done. I gave it a coat of gloss Krylon acrylic. I don't know that they're making that matte acrylic, the big cans of Krylon, and I've always been pretty happy with that. I use the matte on most of my plastic models, except for things that are going to have a shiny surface. But I managed to pick up a few cans by online ordering, but they may have discontinued it, which is kind of a bummer because I've always liked the Krylon matte and gloss acrylic final coats. And that was the presentation, PowerPoint. Oh, I think I might have, let me see, I got attach the fins. Oh, here's my, I can do this real time too, but here's my little video on my 3D models. Oh, anyway, I was just gonna show a little more from the Craftsmanship. This is the biggest 3D model I've built, and this is from Aerobotics Parts. The entire nose is pause this for a second. I've loved this rocket ever since I knew about it, and I built one of the ones that Peter Allway built. I built one of those kits, but I've also scratch built two that are about twice the size of this, maybe not quite. And I flew them at NARCON in scale competition. The second one I detailed the bolts and everything, and I flew it at Arizona NARCON. And I was in second place after judging, and unfortunately the first place model crashed during its flight, and mine worked nicely. I got pictures of it, and I ended up winning scale with it. But I had put PVC rings in, I had Dremeled out these holes, I had used hex. There's little bolts hidden in there like on the real one. I had used hex, Plastruct hex, and cut little bolt heads and inserted them all. I had all the same details, but this one was all 3D printed. That entire nose, I did the band clamps in that and the heat shields, but he 3D printed. You can see him. He 3D printed in all that stuff. It's just amazing. And since it was my favorite rocket, I decided to spend the money and build it. It's never flown yet. Each of those solids is 3D printed, one solid piece. And the fin unit from right around there's this joint that I hid pretty well, but the fin unit's all 3D printed, has the frame kind of fins. Just amazing. And I just like the rocket so much, I bit the bullet and paid the price for that one. It uses, I think it was a BT-70 or maybe ST-20, but something like that. You can see the bolt details on the solids, the frame, yeah. Everything's there. Kevin Suspides really did a heck of a job on coming up with that one. And so you had to buy 4 parts. You had to buy that big nose section. You had to buy the fin, one-piece fin unit. There's the bolt heads and 2 of the solid boosters. I haven't completely put the recovery system in it yet. There's more on the nose and the bolt patterns, the Mormon clamps, the heat shields for the Mormon clamps. Just amazing stuff. One of my favorite rockets. I'm doing this Thoragina. I built one back in the late 60s. And now on this one, the adapter and the nose cone were from Balsa Machining. But that fin unit, I remember building that from paper and launch lugs and stuff. There, it's all 3D printed unit. I still got a ways to go on this. I've got to put on the tunnels, and I gotta print myself some decals and make clear fin unit. But he does make the adapter section, but it was like 4 times the cost of the balsa one. The nose cone I got off of them. Well, anyway, that's where I've been going lately with most of my building. I'm not finished with that up. So that's about. Let me go over to the Q&A. We got about 10, 15 minutes. What are your rules for paint types, brands, enamel, primer, enamel color coats, enamel? I'll tell you right off first is I don't like enamels. I like acrylics and lacquers. For model rockets, I mostly use lacquers. I do some fine stuff with acrylics, and I've done some black with acrylics. I'll either use Vallejo, little squeeze bottles, which are nice. That I've used Tamiya. There's come in little jars, which I don't like as much as the squeeze bottles. I went on rockets. Unless it's scale or something, I still kind of like a Krylon spray, big cans. I mean, the cost is so much less. If you're doing a real fine job, like James Duffy said, you might want to spend for the particularly scale models. You might want to opt for the Tamiya lacquers. They're great. I mean, I can't say enough about them. And I use them on car models in particular. I guess I missed one. But anyway, I'm more lacquers and acrylics. I have come to not really like. I use Rust-Oleum Primers. I'm not as thrilled with their colors. Krylon colors, but be careful these days. The original formulation was absolutely great. The current formulation, I'm not that thrilled with it. It's very easy to overspray and have it run. They seem thinner than they did. How do you get Krylon to work? Yeah, Mark. There's some that I will not use. I can't remember exactly what. There's one formulation right now that's if you're careful and don't put it on heavy enough to run. And I kind of like the black, the matte, the medium black, not the hard matte, not the hard flat. Oh, I've also found now this, Mark, this is one thing I have noticed is the mattes are easier to put on than the glosses. I mean, you like a gloss to put on decals like on the Antar, but I sprayed the rocket with Krylon matte white, and it is so much simpler to put on without runs and get good coverage. When I put on the gloss, it runs so easily. So I before I did the decals, after I had the matte white on, I clear sprayed it with the Krylon, and then the decals went down nice. So that's one thing is the Krylon glosses these days is not good to work with. You remove the film of epoxy. Well, if you're working with 5-minute epoxy, you don't got much time to do that. I just pretty well smooth it out with my finger. I remove it from my finger afterward with alcohol when I'm done. But I've done it in the past, but it's a little tricky trying to smooth the surface of the epoxy on the rocket. I would just recommend really using your finger and like squeegeeing it so that, and I got good joints. I don't know how good you can see that, but you can see I got a pretty good joint. It's blended right in. Try to show where I said one of those. Like there's a little mistake. You can see the little mistake up there where I'm talking about not clean it up. There. You can see that's excess epoxy that I didn't see and didn't wipe off. But I could have wiped that off with my finger. It wouldn't have been any problem. Do the 3D printed? No, the 3D printed parts are actually pretty light. They aren't heavy at all. You're right. They're balsa kind because they're all hollow. There's nothing, you know. They're basically about like your plastic nose cone you get with the kit. The weight is. I'm trying to. This is another one. While I got this, I got one of those. What did he used to call it? He passed away, John Pursley, but I'm stuck on this rocket. But I got it uses 3D printed parts. That's all. That's one piece 3D printed nose cone from Aerobotics. It uses a center section, and then it has a tube to pass through to put your parachute in the upper section. He printed just like the real rocket. Accurate wraps. I heard somebody else was going to take it over, but I haven't seen them. Obviously got a long ways to go, but that's cool. So, but no problem with the weight on the part. Those parts are really lightweight. I don't know. It's about David Koenn. I don't know what way method I bought them from Shapeways. As I say, I have never 3D printed myself yet, although I'm pretty sure I'm probably gonna maybe move into doing it. They got big fancy industrial 3D printing machines. When I order from them, they're printed, real time, and it usually takes a couple of weeks to once the order's in to get them, but they've always been good. I've got them in reasonable time in that. I got to learn more myself, and as I say, maybe try it, but I do not know what way they do it. I will say this about the surfaces. They're a little rough. I remember a friend of mine from Model Rockets got a very early 3D printer, and he was printing like Saturn 1B fins or something, and it was awful. It was atrocious. I mean, it was like tiny little steps for ants to walk up. These are pretty nice, but they are not, because inherently in the process, you're not going to get, I've primed them and sanded them a little bit. Let me look at, I ended up with a pretty darn smooth finish on this, and there was a little rough when I got it, but I did a minimal amount of sanding after the priming, and I got a nice smooth, really almost like balsa finish after you sand and sealed it. But yeah, you're gonna have a little roughness is inherent in the process, and the fancier the machine that prints it, the smoother surface you'll get. Future, for whatever the name is, finish, pro or con. I don't use it on rockets. I use spray lacquers, Krylon acrylics, either the matte, depending upon if it's like a scale model. I'll probably paint it with Krylon matte lacquer, acrylic lacquer, and but I do use Future, and I use it on plastic models, and I've always had good luck with it. I just bought a new container of it because my old one, I guess, aged out. I will tell you one funny thing though was, and it's the only time it ever happened to me, when I do my fine model cars, I will use Tamiya spray lacquer to get a nice gloss finish, and then after the decals or whatever go on, I will put a coat of Future on, and it's always worked great. Sometimes I've airbrushed it. I've kind of gone back now to hand brushing it because it does level out, and as long as you put it on at a decent thickness, not too much, but a decent thickness, it will level itself out. Now, one funny thing happened to me a few years back. I had built a kind of a fancy model of the 1960s Batman TV series, cool car. there's a lot of detail on this particular kit, and I finished it. It looked great, and I believe I airbrushed it with Future after, and it looked great. I came back about a year later, and the surface had crazed. Everywhere there was Future, it was like a multitude of cracks. And I tried to remove it, and there was no way I was going to remove that. I ended up buying the kit's been discontinued. I ended up finding one, and I bought it, and I just redid the body. But I typically don't use it on rockets. That's my answer. I use it on my model cars to finish up a gloss finish. If you aren't looking for a gloss finish, you don't. I like matte finishes mostly, but obviously there's some things that work better with that. I did the Antar with gloss. I finished that with gloss. Anyway, that's my thing on Future. I have it. I use it, and I've only had one problem with it ever. So, kind of guess that's about it. No more questions, and appreciate everybody being here. I hope it. Just somebody type me in chat. Did it all? Did I get it integrated? Did my presentations and my videos show up to you guys? Because I don't see that. I don't see if I got it all, done right. And somebody say, yeah, it turned out right or something. Because I hope it did. Anyway, thank you guys, and I hope I helped you. There's better experts on this, like James Duffy, than me, but I've been doing it a long time. So and I still I think I enjoy building maybe more than okay. Hey, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to know. Okay. Never done this before. I'm happy it worked, and I once again thank you guys, and maybe I'll see you at a launch sometime. I'm going to stop broadcasting now.